They thought her silence was weakness. They thought her lack of tears was an admission of guilt. For 72 hours, Nia sat in the freezing courtroom, a statue of gray wool and quiet resolve, watching her tech mogul ex-husband and his shark of a lawyer dismantle her character with practiced lies. She didn't scream. She didn't object. She just watched. Everyone, from the jury to the press gallery, thought it was over. They thought Damon Sterling had won before the gavel even fell. But they didn't know that Nia wasn't silent because she was afraid. She was silent because she was counting down. She was waiting for the specific moment Damon would have to put his hand on the scanner to prove he owned the company. When the judge finally ordered that one simple login attempt, the result didn't just end a marriage. It deleted an entire fortune. You won't believe the secret she hid in the source code. Welcome to the story of how the quietest person in the room became the most dangerous. Before we dive into this tale of high-tech revenge, ask yourself this. Could you stay quiet while someone stole your life's work just to spring the perfect trap? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoy stories where the underdog wins and karma hits hard, please tap the like button as it really helps the channel grow. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, let's enter the courtroom. The mahogany doors of Courtroom 4B in the Superior Court of Seattle felt heavy, not just with wood and brass, but with the suffocating weight of inevitable defeat. The industrial air conditioner hummed a low, monotonous drone that seemed to vibrate against the tension in the room, chilling the skin of everyone present despite the summer heat pressing against the windows outside. Damon Sterling adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, a subtle smirk playing on his lips that only those closest to him would recognize as a sign of ultimate victory. He didn't look like a man fighting for his assets. He looked like a man who had already bought the outcome and was simply waiting for the receipt to be printed. At 35, Damon was the golden boy of the tech industry, a man whose dazzling smile had graced the cover of Forbes and whose handshake was rumored to be worth millions. To the world, he was the visionary architect of the Sentinel system, the biometric security software that protected everything from Swiss banks to government servers. Sitting beside him was his attorney, Carla Vane, a woman known in legal circles as the Viper. She didn't just win cases. She eviscerated the opposition until there was nothing left but dust and regret. And on the bench behind them sat Jessica, Damon's new fiancée, a 22-year-old model impeccably dressed in a modest cream suit that screamed innocent stepmother, clutching a designer purse with knuckles white from anticipation. On the other side of the aisle sat Nia. She wore a simple gray dress that had seen better days, the fabric slightly worn at the elbows, her hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun that pulled at her temples. She looked tired, not the frantic, hysterical exhaustion of a woman scorned, but the deep, bone-weary fatigue of someone who had been swimming against a violent current for a decade. Nia was a beautiful black woman, but in this room, under these harsh fluorescent lights, she had made herself small. She had made herself invisible. Her hands rested folded on the table, still as stone, her dark eyes fixed on the grain of the wood. To the jury, she looked defeated. To Damon, she looked pathetic. But inside Nia's mind, a complex algorithm was running, calculating variables and probabilities with the speed of a supercomputer. She wasn't listening to Carla Vane's opening statement about Damon's brilliance. She was remembering. She was remembering the smell of old paper and coffee in the MIT library 10 years ago, the place where her life had effectively ended and Damon's had begun. The memory washed over her, drowning out the drone of the courtroom. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. The library was nearly empty, save for the rhythmic hum of the ventilation system and the scratching of pens on paper. Nia was surrounded by towers of textbooks on cryptography and computational biology. She wasn't just studying, she was creating. She was building a code that used the human heartbeat, the specific, chaotic rhythm of the cardiac cycle, as a cryptographic key. It was brilliant, it was revolutionary, and it was lonely. That was when Damon had approached her. He wasn't the polished billionaire back then. He was a charming, slightly desperate business major who needed a tutor for his intro to coding class. He had leaned against her table, flashing that smile that would one day fool investors and judges alike. He had brought her coffee. He had listened to her talk about algorithms when no one else would. He made her feel seen, not just as a brain, but as a woman. But looking back now, sitting in the cold chair of the defense table, Nia realized he hadn't been looking at her with affection. He had been looking at her the way a miner looks at a vein of gold, something to be extracted, used, and discarded. The theft hadn't happened all at once. It was a slow erosion of her ownership. It started with him suggesting they work on a project together. Then, it was him presenting the project in class because she was too shy to speak in public. Then came the investors. Nia remembered the day perfectly. They were sitting in their cramped apartment, the air thick with the smell of cheap takeout. Damon had held her hands, his eyes wide with fake sincerity. He told her that the venture capitalists were old-fashioned. He said they wouldn't understand a genius black woman leading a tech company. He said the industry was biased, that they needed a face, a white, male, confident face to get the funding. He promised her it was only for show. He promised they were partners 50-50. "I'll be the face, you be the brain," he had said, his voice smooth as silk. "We'll build this empire together, Nia, trust me." And she had. She had trusted him because she loved him, and because she believed that the code was what mattered, not the credit. She didn't know then that she was signing away her soul. The courtroom snapped back into focus as Carla Vane's voice rose an octave, sharp and piercing. "My client, Mr. Sterling, is the sole architect of Sterling Security," Carla declared, pacing in front of the jury box like a predator stalking prey. "He provides a stable, affluent environment for his children." The respondent, on the other hand, Carla gestured dismissively toward Nia, "while we sympathize with her current struggles, has no background in enterprise technology. She is merely a housewife who is jealous of Mr. Sterling's success. We are offering her a generous settlement of $5,000 a month, which is more than fair for a woman whose only contribution to the household was hosting dinner parties and managing the cleaning staff." Damon leaned over to his lawyer, whispering something that made Carla suppress a smile. The disrespect was palpable, a physical weight in the air. Damon turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Nia. He mouthed the words, "Take the deal." His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth she had once thought was love. He truly believed she was nothing. He believed his own lie so thoroughly that he had forgotten the nights she spent debugging his errors, the weekends she spent rewriting the entire kernel of the system while he was out networking at parties. But the betrayal of the work was nothing compared to the betrayal of her mind. Nia's fingers tightened slightly on her own wrist, feeling her pulse. It was steady, strong, unlike the years she spent in the fog. That was Damon's greatest crime, the one that wasn't on the indictment sheet. When the company started to take off, when Sentinel Security became a billion-dollar unicorn, Nia had started to ask questions. She wanted her name on the patents. She wanted to be the CTO. That was when the gaslighting began. It started with small things. He would move her keys and claim she lost them. He would change the passwords on her laptop and tell her she was forgetting things. Then came the doctors on Damon's payroll. They told her she was suffering from postpartum depression, then bipolar disorder, then early-onset schizophrenia. They prescribed pills, heavy oblong pills that made her mouth taste like metal and her mind feel like it was wading through molasses. For 3 years, Nia was a zombie in her own home. She remembered sitting in the nursery, watching her daughter sleep, unable to feel anything but a dull, gray emptiness. Damon would come home, smell of expensive perfume that wasn't hers, and ask her if she had taken her medicine. He would stroke her hair and tell her she was sick, that she was lucky he stayed with her, that no one else would deal with a crazy wife. He isolated her from her friends, from her family, until he was the only voice in her ear. "You're unstable, Nia," he would whisper at night. "You can't handle the stress of the company. Let me take care of it, just sleep." And she slept. She slept while he built a fortune on her code. She slept while he had affairs. She slept while he erased her existence from the company history. But the human mind is resilient, and the mind of a cryptographer is designed to find patterns, even through a chemical haze. The awakening happened 6 months ago. Nia had dropped a pill on the bathroom floor. It rolled under the heavy vanity cabinet. She had gotten down on her hands and knees to retrieve it, and there, wedged in the dust, she found a receipt. It was a receipt for a jewelry store for a diamond necklace she had never received. The date was her birthday, but the clarity didn't come from the jealousy, it came from the anger. That spark of rage burned through the fog. She didn't take the pill that night, or the next. For 2 weeks, she pretended. She would place the pill on her tongue, take a sip of water, and then spit the dissolving chemical into a tissue the moment Damon turned his back. The withdrawal was brutal. Her body shook, her head pounded with migraines that felt like lightning strikes, and she sweated through the silk sheets of their marital bed. But with the pain came clarity. The fog lifted, revealing the sharp, jagged edges of her reality. She realized she wasn't sick. She was being sedated. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, kept docile so the true architect of the Sentinel system wouldn't speak up. That was when the plan began. Nia didn't confront him. She didn't scream. She went back to her roots. She went back to being the silent observer. She waited until Damon left for his business trips, and she went to the basement. The basement server room was Damon's pride and joy, a fortress of cooling fans and blinking LED lights. But to Nia, it was an open door. She knew the passwords because she had created the password protocols. She logged in, not as an admin, but through a backdoor she had left in the code 10 years ago, a digital signature she called the mother key. Night after night, while the house slept, Nia worked. She didn't steal money. That would be too easy and too easily traced. Instead, she wrote a patch, a software update. It was elegant code, beautiful in its destruction. She buried it deep within the kernel of the upcoming 5 update. The update Damon was launching this very week to pump the stock price before the divorce was finalized. She called it the Heartbeat Protocol. It was a simple command. If the system detected a login attempt for a critical administrative function, like transferring assets or launching the IPO, it would require a biometric scan. But not just a fingerprint. It would scan for the specific cardiac rhythm of the creator. And Damon's heart, cold and arrogant, would never match. Sarah, Nia's court-appointed public defender, nudged her arm, bringing her back to the present. Sarah was young, barely out of law school, with frizzy hair and a suit that was a size too big. She looked terrified. Carla Vane was eating her alive. "Your Honor," Sarah stammered, standing up. "My client contests the claim that Mr. Sterling wrote the Sentinel source code. We believe there is hidden evidence." Carla barked an objection before Sarah could even finish. "Objection, hearsay, there is no evidence. Ms. Nia has not produced a single document, a single email, or a single line of code to support these delusional claims." Judge Banks sighed, rubbing his temples beneath his glasses. He was an old man who wanted this messy, high-profile divorce to be over. "Sustained, the judge rumbled, his voice deep and impatient. Ms. Sarah, unless you have concrete proof, move on. We are not here to indulge in fantasy. Sarah sat down, defeated. She looked at Nia with desperation in her eyes. Nia, she whispered urgently, you have to give me something. You told me you had a plan. We are losing everything here. The alimony, the house, the custody. He is destroying you. Nia turned her head slowly. Her eyes were dark, intelligent pools that reflected the fluorescent lights. For the first time in days, they held a dangerous spark. Not yet, Sarah, Nia said, her voice barely a whisper but steady as a rock. Wait for the timestamp. Sarah hissed back, the timestamp? What are you talking about? We need financial records, not timestamps. Nia didn't answer. She just looked at the large digital clock on the courtroom wall. It read 1:55 p.m. The Sentinel System 5 launch, the IPO that would make Damon a billionaire 3 times over, was scheduled to go live at 2:00 p.m. 5 minutes. Damon took the stand. He looked the picture of humble success, playing the role of the beleaguered genius to perfection. Carla Vane walked him through the questions they had rehearsed 1,000 times. Mr. Sterling, Carla asked smoothly, can you explain to the court the origin of the code? Damon sighed, looking down at his hands with a practiced modesty. I wrote it in our basement, he lied, his voice rich with false emotion. It took me years of sleepless nights. Nia was supportive in her own way. She brought me coffee. She kept the kids quiet, but she doesn't understand code. She barely knows how to use her iPhone. It's tragic, really, how the mind deteriorates. The audacity of the lie hit Nia like a physical blow, but she didn't flinch. She remembered the nights she was the one sleepless, breastfeeding their daughter with one arm while typing code with the other, while Damon snored in the master bedroom. She remembered explaining to him what a blockchain was 3 times because he couldn't grasp the concept. She remembered him taking credit for her work in interview after interview, while she stood in the shadows, holding his coat. He is lying, Sarah whispered, scribbling furiously on her notepad. We know he's lying, but we can't prove it. We don't need to prove it, Nia murmured. He is going to prove it for us. Nia stood up. The movement was so sudden, so fluid, that it startled the bailiff standing near the wall. She wasn't tall, but in that moment she seemed to loom over the defense table. Actually, Your Honor, Nia said, her voice clear and startlingly loud in the quiet room. I would like to speak for myself now. Carla Vane let out a short, incredulous chuckle. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. She has counsel. Is she firing her attorney in the middle of closing arguments? I have the right to address the court regarding the validity of these claims, Nia said, her voice steady, cutting through Carla's mockery. And I believe Mr. Sterling has forgotten one very small, very important detail about our marriage. Judge Banks looked intrigued. He was bored of Carla's slick maneuvering and Damon's rehearsed speeches. He sensed a shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. He wanted to see what the quiet woman in gray had to say. Very well, the judge said, leaning forward. But tread carefully, Mrs. Sterling. This is a court of law, not a therapy session. What is this detail? Nia walked around the table. She didn't walk toward the witness stand. She walked toward the center of the room, directly in front of the judge, turning her back on Damon. She could feel his eyes boring into her spine, a mix of confusion and irritation. He wasn't afraid yet, but he would be. The detail, Nia said, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room, is that before I was a housewife and before I was a mother, Mr. Sterling seems to have forgotten what my degree is in. Damon frowned. He actually had to think about it. He had met Nia at a library 10 years ago. He assumed she was studying art history or literature, something he considered useless. He had never really asked. He had just assumed she was there to be his audience. I hold a double doctorate, Nia continued, her voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, more precise. in computational biology and cryptography from MIT. The silence that followed was heavy. Carla Vane scoffed, rolling her eyes. And this is relevant how? Congratulations on your degree, Mrs. Sterling. It doesn't prove you wrote the code. Plenty of people have degrees and can't write a hello world script. It proves I know how to lock it, Nia corrected, turning slowly to face Damon. The Sentinel code is based on a biometric rhythm. It mimics the heartbeat and DNA signature of its creator to generate security keys. That is the selling point, isn't it, Damon? Security only you can unlock. Damon shifted in his seat, his confidence wavering for the first time. Yes, he said, his voice tight. That is the marketing slogan. Then show us, Nia said. She pointed to the large, secure terminal the bailiff had brought in earlier to display the financial assets. It was running the Sentinel interface. The IPO goes live in 2 minutes, Damon. You need to authorize the trade using the master admin key. If you wrote the code, your biometric signature is the root key. Log in. Damon froze. He looked at the large digital screen on the wall. 1:58 p.m., 2 minutes. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. He looked at Carla. Carla looked confused. This wasn't in the script. I don't have my admin key on me, Damon stammered, forcing a laugh. It's in the vault, security protocols. You don't need a physical key, Nia said, her voice relentless. You told the press yesterday that the system recognizes the creator's touch. You told Forbes that the code is an extension of your own biology. Go ahead, Damon, touch the screen. The courtroom went deadly silent. The press gallery leaned forward, pens hovering over notepads. The judge narrowed his eyes. Mr. Sterling, Judge Banks said, his voice leaving no room for argument. If you are the architect as you swore under oath, this should be simple. Demonstrate the software. Damon stood up, his legs shaking slightly. He looked at the terminal like it was a loaded gun. He knew he hadn't written the core kernel. He knew he had stolen it. But he also knew that Nia had set up the admin accounts for him years ago. It should work. It had to work. He was the admin. He approached the scanner. Do it, Damon, Carla hissed under her breath. End this charade. Damon took a deep breath. He wiped his sweaty palm on his pants. He reached out. 1:59 p.m., 1 minute left. He placed his trembling hand on the glass scanner. The room held its breath. The light under the scanner flared. The light under the scanner didn't glow with the soft, welcoming azure of a successful authorization. Instead, it flared with a harsh, violent crimson that washed over Damon Sterling's pale face like the warning strobe of a sinking ship. A discordant, grinding tone tore through the hushed courtroom, a sound so rejecting and final that it caused the court reporter to flinch. On the massive screen projected behind the witness stand, the Sentinel logo, a stylized shield that Damon had paid a graphic design firm $2 million to create, shattered into 1,000 digital fragments. In its place, a single word pulsed in an aggressive, bold font, unauthorized. The robotic voice of the system, usually smooth and feminine, sounded clipped and metallic as it announced the failure to the entire room. Identity unverified, biometric mismatch, intruder alert, access denied. Damon snatched his hand back as if the glass had burned him. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. The arrogance that had been his armor for the last decade evaporated in a single second, replaced by a raw, naked panic. It's a glitch, Damon stammered, his voice cracking. He looked frantically at the judge, then at the press gallery, forcing a terrified smile that looked more like a grimace. It's a hardware malfunction. The sensor is dirty. I need a cloth. Someone get me a cloth. He pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket and began scrubbing the glass scanner with manic intensity, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He pressed his hand down again, harder this time, flattening his palm until his knuckles turned white. The result was instantaneous. The harsh tone sounded again, louder this time, echoing off the high ceilings. Access denied. Security lockout imminent. Carla Vane stood up, her composure cracking. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. This equipment is clearly faulty. We demand a recess to bring in our own technical team to verify the integrity of the machine. The machine is fine, Carla, Nia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the rising murmur of the courtroom with the precision of a scalpel. She hadn't moved from her spot in the center of the aisle. She stood with her hands clasped loosely in front of her, watching Damon's meltdown with a detached, clinical curiosity. The machine is doing exactly what it was programmed to do. It is looking for the architect, and it knows a thief when it feels one. Damon spun around, his face twisted in a snarl. You hacked it, he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at her. You sabotaged the terminal, arrest her, she planted a virus to embarrass me. Judge Banks slammed his gavel down, the heavy wooden strike silencing the room. Order, the judge roared. Mr. Sterling, you will control yourself, or I will have you removed. You claimed under oath that this system recognizes you biologically. Are you telling me that a hacker changed your DNA? Damon was breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his temple. She's a witch, Your Honor. She knows backdoors. He trailed off, realizing the trap he was walking into. If he admitted she knew backdoors, he was admitting she knew the code. If he claimed he was the sole creator, he had to explain why the system treated him like a stranger. He was checkmated, and he didn't even know who had moved the pieces. Step aside, Damon, Nia said, walking forward. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, the heels of her shoes clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. She stopped next to him. She smelled of rain and cheap soap, a stark contrast to his expensive cologne, yet in that moment she seemed to occupy more space than he did. She looked at the scanner, then up at the screen. The clock read 2 p.m. exactly. The IPO just launched, Nia noted softly. The market is waiting for the authorization signal. If the system doesn't get the architect's handshake in the next 60 seconds, it triggers the dead man's switch. It deletes the encryption keys. The stock goes to zero. Damon's eyes went wide. You wouldn't, he whispered. That's my money, that's my legacy. No, Nia corrected him. It's mine. She reached out. She didn't wipe the screen. She didn't hesitate. She placed her right hand gently on the glass panel. The room held its breath. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the crimson light faded, replaced by a soft, pulsing green that seemed to beat in time with a living rhythm. The harsh grinding noise was gone, replaced by a harmonic chime that sounded almost like a choir. The text on the screen dissolved, reassembling itself into a new message. Biometric match confirmed. DNA sequence verified. Heartbeat rhythm verified. The robotic voice returned, but this time it was warm, deferential. Welcome back, architect. System unlocked. The gallery erupted. Reporters were on their feet, typing furiously on their phones. The sketch artist was sketching so fast his hand was a blur. Carla Vane slumped back into her chair, putting her head in her hands. She knew the law, and she knew when a case had just turned into a crime scene. Damon stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. He looked at his hand, then at Nia's. How? He croaked. I changed the admin codes. I wiped your profiles. You changed the passwords, Damon, Nia said, looking at him with pity. You can't change the source code, not when you don't understand how it works. I embedded my heartbeat into the kernel 10 years ago. Every time you logged in, the system was just tolerating you as a guest. Today, I revoked your guest pass. But Nia wasn't done. The terminal was now open, displaying the root directory of the Sentinel system. She didn't navigate to the bank accounts. She didn't navigate to the stock options. She navigated to a hidden partition on the hard drive, a folder labeled the insurance policy. Your Honor, Nia addressed the bench. ignoring Damon's trembling form. Mr. Sterling claimed that my mental instability was the reason for our divorce. He claimed I was paranoid, that I hallucinated conspiracies. He submitted medical records from Dr. Eris claiming I was schizophrenic. Judge Banks nodded slowly, his eyes glued to the screen. He did. Those records are real, Nia said, but the diagnosis was bought, and I have the receipt. She tapped a file named October 14 Living Room, MP4. The video player opened on the massive courtroom screen. The footage was high definition, taken from one of the hidden security cameras Damon had installed to monitor the staff, cameras he had forgotten Nia had access to. The timestamp was from 3 years ago. The scene showed the living room of their penthouse. Damon was standing by the wet bar mixing a drink. He wasn't alone. He was on the phone, the speakerphone active. The audio was crystal clear. I doubled the dose, Eris, Damon's voice rang out in the courtroom, casual and cold. She's been sleeping for 18 hours. Is that safe? A voice on the other end, tinny but recognizable as Dr. Eris, replied, It's safe enough, Mr. Sterling, but you have to be careful. If she takes too much of the sedative, it could stop her heart. Why don't we just institutionalize her now? On the screen, Damon took a sip of his scotch. Not yet. I need her to sign the patent transfer for the version 4 update. If she's locked up, she can't sign. I need her lucid enough to hold a pen, but crazy enough that no one believes her if she reads the contract. Just keep writing the prescriptions. I'll handle the dosage. The video continued. Showed Damon walking over to the couch where Nia was sleeping, slumped over in an unnatural, drug-induced stupor. He shook her awake roughly. When she mumbled, confused and slurring her words, he handed her a glass of water laced with a white powder he had just crushed. Drink this, babe, Video Damon said, stroking her hair with a chilling tenderness. It's for your anxiety. You're having an episode again. You're scaring the kids. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of horror. Even the air conditioner seemed to have stopped humming. The jurors were staring at Damon with open disgust. One juror, an older woman in the front row, had her hand over her mouth. Jessica, the fiancée sitting in the gallery, stood up slowly. She looked at the screen, then at the back of Damon's head. She didn't scream. She simply picked up her designer purse, turned around, and walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking a sharp goodbye that Damon didn't even notice. He was too busy staring at his own digital ghost. That's a fake, Damon screamed, the sound tearing his throat. That's AI, it's a deep fake. She generated it. Look at the shadows, look at the pixels, it's not real. He looked wildly at the judge. Your Honor, you know what technology can do these days. She's a coder, she made this. This video is not an MP4 file, Nia said calmly, cutting off his rant. It is a block in the Sentinel blockchain. Every frame is cryptographically signed and timestamped by the server the moment it was recorded. It is immutable. It cannot be edited. It cannot be faked. And to prove it, she typed a quick command. The screen displayed the digital signature of the file. It matched the server key perfectly. The system verifies the truth, Damon. That's why you sold it to the government, remember, because it never lies. Judge Banks slowly took off his glasses. He looked at Damon Sterling not as a judge looks at a defendant, but as a human being looks at a monster. He turned to the bailiff. Bailiff, secure the doors, the judge ordered, his voice low and dangerous. Mr. Sterling, you are under immediate arrest. For what? Damon shrieked, backing away as 2 uniformed officers approached him. For perjury, I can pay the fine, I have millions. For perjury, yes, Judge Banks said. But also for spousal abuse, forced sedation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. And based on that phone call, likely attempted poisoning. The officers grabbed Damon by the arms. He struggled, flailing like a trapped animal. Don't touch me, do you know who I am? I am the CEO of Sterling Security, I own this city. Actually, Nia said, her voice carrying over the commotion. She was typing one final command into the terminal. You don't. She hit the enter key. The screen flashed a new message. Stock transfer complete. Ownership reverted to trustee Nia Corey. The poison pill clause I activated just executed, Nia explained, watching him struggle. In the event of a confirmed felony by the CEO involving the misuse of the system, all intellectual property rights revert to the original creator. The company isn't yours anymore, Damon. It's mine, and I just fired you. Damon let out a guttural scream of rage, a sound devoid of language, just pure, unadulterated hate. He lunged toward Nia, dragging the two officers with him for a step before they slammed him face first onto the defense table. The sound of his expensive nose breaking against the wood was a dull, sickening thud that echoed through the room. Handcuffs were snapped onto his wrists, cheap steel handcuffs that no biometric key could open. As they hauled him up, blood streaming down his face, he looked at Nia one last time. You planned this, he hissed, spitting blood onto the floor. You waited 3 years, you let me drug you let me torture you, just for this moment. You're sick, you're sicker than I am. Nia looked at him. For the first time, her mask of calm slipped, revealing the ocean of pain beneath. I didn't stay for the trap, Damon, she said softly, though the microphone picked it up clearly. Stayed because I hoped you would change. I stayed because I wanted my daughter to have a father, but when you threatened to take her away, that was when the architect went to work. She turned her back on him. Get him out of my sight. The officers marched him out the side door, his screams of I'll bury you, fading into the hallway until the heavy door slammed shut, cutting him off. The courtroom remained frozen. Carla Vane was frantically packing her briefcase, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Sarah, Nia's lawyer, was staring at her client with awe. Nia, Sarah whispered, you just took the whole company, you're a billionaire. Nia didn't smile. She looked at the terminal screen where the green welcome architect message was still pulsing. She reached out and closed the laptop. I'm not a billionaire, Sarah, Nia said, picking up her worn purse. I'm a mother who just bought her freedom. Ms. Corey, Judge Banks said. Nia turned. The judge was standing, a sign of respect he rarely showed. Regarding the custody arrangement, I think we can dispense with the formalities. Sole legal and physical custody is granted to the mother, and regarding the assets, I am freezing Mr. Sterling's personal accounts pending a federal investigation. You may file for immediate restitution. Thank you, Your Honor, Nia said. She didn't wait for the dismissal. She walked down the center aisle. The reporters, usually a pack of wolves, parted for her like the Red Sea. They didn't shout questions. They didn't shove microphones in her face. They were too stunned. They just snapped photos, the flashes popping like lightning storms, illuminating the woman who had walked in a ghost and was walking out a titan. As she pushed open the heavy double doors of the courthouse, the wall of sound from the outside world hit her. The news had already broken. A crowd had gathered at the bottom of the steps. Not just press, but people. Women holding signs supporting her. Tech workers who had followed the IPO crash in real time. They were chanting her name. Nia, Nia, Nia. She stopped at the top of the stairs. The sun had broken through the clouds, bathing the wet pavement in gold. She put on a pair of oversized sunglasses, shielding her eyes not from the sun, but from the new reality she had created. She pulled out her phone. There was one text message. It was from Maxwell Carter, the CFO of the company, the man who had helped Damon hide the money but had clearly just watched the live stream of the trial. The text read, Ms. Corey, I am so sorry. I didn't know about the drugs, I swear. Please tell me what you want us to do. The stock is in freefall. The board is resigning. Nia typed a reply with her thumb, her movement quick and decisive. Do not resign. Stay in the office. I am coming over to rebrand. And Maxwell, order pizza. We're going to be pulling an all-nighter fixing the code. She hit send. She walked down the steps, her head held high. She wasn't the victim anymore. She wasn't the ex-wife. She was the architect, and she had a lot of rebuilding to do. But the story doesn't end here. While Damon was being processed in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and despair, another notification pinged on a server 3,000 miles away. In a dark room in Washington, D.C., a man in a gray suit watched the courtroom footage on a loop. He wasn't looking at Nia. He was looking at the code scrolling on the screen behind her in the video. He paused the frame, zoomed in, and picked up a secure phone. "Director," the man said, "we have a problem. The Sentinel system, the one we use for the Pentagon, it has a backdoor. And the woman who owns the key just walked out of a Seattle courtroom. If she wants to, she can shut down half the government's security grid." There was a pause on the line. "Bring her in," the voice on the other end commanded. "If she won't work for us, she can't work for anyone." Back in the police transport van, Damon Sterling wasn't screaming anymore. He was sitting in the dark, the metallic tang of blood in his mouth. He was thinking. Nia thought she had won. She thought the video was the end, but she had forgotten one thing: the backup server. The one he had installed in the Cayman Islands, the one not connected to the blockchain. The one that held the real dirt, not on him, on her. He smiled, a gruesome expression through his broken nose. He still had one card left to play. And this one wouldn't just destroy her fortune, it would destroy her freedom. The rain had started again, a relentless Seattle drizzle that turned the city lights into smeared streaks of neon against the black glass of the SUV window. Nia Corey sat in the back of the town car, the leather seat cool against her skin, watching the headquarters of Sterling security loom closer. It was a monolith of steel and blue glass, a 50-story dagger piercing the night sky. For 10 years, she had been banned from this building. Damon had told security that she was a liability, that her presence distracted the engineers. He had erased her name from the lobby directory and removed her biometric data from the elevators. Now she was arriving not as a visitor, but as the owner. But the triumph she expected to feel was absent. Instead, there was a cold knot of anxiety in her stomach. The text message from the unknown number that had flashed on her phone 5 minutes ago was still burned into her retina. "You opened the door, Nia. Now the wolves are coming in." She didn't know who sent it, but she knew they were right. She had exposed the backdoor to the world, and in the world of cybersecurity, visibility was a death sentence. The car pulled up to the curb, the tires hissing on the wet pavement. A phalanx of security guards was waiting, but unlike the old days, they weren't there to bar her entry. They stood at attention, opening the door before the driver could even put the car in park. Nia stepped out, her heels striking the concrete with a rhythmic authority. She ignored the few paparazzi who had managed to follow her from the courthouse, their cameras clicking like distant insects. She walked through the revolving doors and into the lobby she had designed on a napkin a decade ago. The air inside was cool and smelled of ozone and expensive espresso. The reception staff, usually busy chatting, went dead silent as she approached the turnstiles. The lead security officer, a man named Miller who had once escorted her out of the building by her arm on Damon's orders, looked pale. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and held out a new badge. It was black with no photo, just her name in silver letters, Nia Corey Architect. "Welcome back, ma'am," Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. Nia took the badge without smiling. "Reset the elevator codes, Miller," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet lobby. "And delete Damon's face from the recognition software. If he tries to walk in here, I want the silent alarm to trip, not the welcome mat." The elevator ride to the penthouse executive suite took 40 seconds. 40 seconds of silence, where Nia could finally lean her head against the cool metal wall and breathe. She was exhausted. The adrenaline from the trial was fading, replaced by the crushing reality of what she had just done. She hadn't just taken a company, she had taken responsibility for the data of 300 million users. She was responsible for the privacy of banks, hospitals, and as she was about to find out, agencies that didn't exist on any public map. The doors slid open with a soft rush of air, revealing the executive floor. It was a hive of panic. Junior executives were running between cubicles with boxes, shredding documents. Phones were ringing incessantly, a cacophony of digital chirps that sounded like a flock of terrified birds. But the moment Nia stepped onto the carpet, the chaos froze. Every head turned. Maxwell Carter, the CFO, stood by the window, clutching a tablet like a shield. He looked like a man who had been waiting for the executioner. Nia walked straight to Damon's office, now her office. The glass walls were opaque, frosted with a privacy setting she had coded herself. She pressed her hand to the panel and the glass cleared instantly. She walked in, threw her purse on the massive oak desk and spun around to face the room. "Maxwell, get in here," she commanded. "Everyone else, if you are shredding documents, stop immediately. If I find one piece of paper missing, I will have the FBI reconstruct it from the confetti and charge you with obstruction of justice. Go back to your desks. We have a patch to deploy." The employees scrambled back to their stations, terrified and relieved to have direction. Maxwell entered the office, closing the door behind him. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Ms. Corey," he began, his voice shaking. "The stock is down 40% in after-hours trading. The board members are calling for a liquidation sale. They want to sell the IP to Google or Amazon before the price hits zero." "We are not selling," Nia said, sitting in the leather chair that still smelled faintly of Damon's cologne. She wrinkled her nose and opened the drawer, finding a bottle of hand sanitizer which she placed on the desk. "We are rebranding. Effective immediately, the company is Onyx Architecture. I want a press release drafted by morning stating that the Sterling era was a beta test, and the security flaws have been purged along with the former CEO." She looked up at Maxwell, her eyes sharp. "Now tell me about the Cayman server." Maxwell froze. The color drained from his face so completely he looked gray. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Nia, please, Damon kept things from me." "Don't lie to me, Maxwell," Nia said softly, leaning forward. "I saw the traffic logs. Every Friday at 3 a.m., a terabyte of encrypted data leaves this building and routes through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Damon wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing data." "What is on that server?" Maxwell slumped into the chair opposite her, defeated. "Blackmail," he whispered. "It's not just user data. Damon was harvesting dirt, incriminating emails, browsing histories, financial secrets of politicians, judges, even the board members. He called it his insurance policy. He said if anyone ever tried to fire him, he would leak it all. But Nia, the server is dead man switched. If Damon doesn't enter a code every 24 hours, it doesn't just delete the data, it publishes it. It sends it to WikiLeaks and every major news outlet in the world." Nia felt a cold chill run down her spine. The insurance policy she had found in the courtroom was just the tip of the iceberg. Damon had turned the company into a weapon. "When is the next check-in?" Nia asked, her fingers already flying across the keyboard of the terminal. "Midnight," Maxwell checked his watch. "That gives us 4 hours, but he's in custody. He can't enter the code. Nia, if that data leaks, the lawsuits will bury us. The government will shut us down for espionage. Then we have to kill the server before midnight," Nia said, her eyes locked on the screen. "Get the engineering team on a secure channel. I need to trace the physical location of that box." As Maxwell ran out of the room to rally the engineers, Nia felt a shift in the air pressure of the room. It was subtle, a feeling she had honed during her years of silence, the feeling of being watched. She looked up. Standing in the corner of the office, in the shadows where the recessed lighting didn't reach, was a man. He hadn't used the door. He hadn't made a sound. He was wearing a gray suit that was expensive but nondescript, the kind of suit designed to be forgotten the moment you looked away. He was older, with silver hair and eyes that looked like shattered glass. Nia didn't scream. She slowly moved her hand toward the silent alarm button under the desk. "I wouldn't do that, Mrs. Corey," the man said. His voice was dry, like sandpaper on stone. "Security won't come. I sent them on a coffee break." He stepped into the light. He held no weapon, but his posture suggested he didn't need one. "Who are you?" Nia asked, keeping her hand inches from the panic button. "And how did you bypass the biometric lock on the elevator?" "My name is Director Vance," the man said. "And I didn't bypass it. I have a master key. The same master key your husband sold to the Department of Defense 3 years ago." Nia's heart skipped a beat. She knew Damon had government contracts, but she didn't know he had given them root access. "Damon sold you a backdoor," she accused. "He sold us a window," Vance corrected. "You, however, seem to have built a door that you now control exclusively." Vance walked closer, resting his hands on the back of the visitor chair. "Let's be frank, Nia. We watched the trial. We saw you access the colonel. We know you have the heartbeat protocol. That is a problem for us. We cannot have a civilian holding the keys to national security infrastructure. The Sentinel system protects the power grid, the banking sector, and the Pentagon's communication relays. If you decide to shut it down, or if you decide to lock us out, the country goes dark." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "We want the source code, Nia, all of it. And we want the biometric lock removed. Tonight." Nia stood up, matching his stare. "You want me to cripple the security so you can spy on people," she said. "That's why Damon built the backdoor, isn't it? So you could bypass the warrants." "National security requires sacrifice," Vance said dismissively. "We are prepared to offer you full immunity for the hack you pulled in court. We will let you keep the company. We will even ensure Damon goes away for a very long time. But you hand over the keys." "And if I say no?" Nia asked. Vance smiled, a thin, humorless expression. "Then you become a threat to national security, and threats are neutralized. We can freeze your assets faster than you froze Damon's. We can label you an enemy combatant. You'll trade this corner office for a black site in Nevada." It was a threat, clear and present, but Vance had made a mistake. He thought he was talking to Nia the victim, the scared housewife. He didn't realize he was talking to the architect. "You can't touch me, Vance," Nia said, her voice steady. "Because if I disappear, or if I lose access to this terminal, the system goes into a logic lock. It encrypts itself so heavily that it would take your quantum computers 1,000 years to crack it. It's a dead man's switch, just like Damon's. Except mine doesn't leak data. It bricks the internet. Do you want to explain to the president why the banking system just turned into a paperweight because you tried to bully a widow?" Vance's smile vanished. He studied her for a long moment, reassessing the threat level. "You're playing a dangerous game, architect," he whispered. "You have enemies on all sides. Damon isn't done with you, and neither are we." He reached into his pocket. Nia flinched, but he only pulled out a business card. It was blank white with a single phone number embossed in black. "When you realize you can't fight a war on 2 fronts, call me. We might be the lesser of 2 evils." He turned and walked toward the door. "Oh, and Nia, check your firewall. It seems your husband has found a computer in prison." Vance disappeared as quickly as he had arrived, leaving Nia alone in the silent office. Her heart was pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the terminal screen. Vance was right. A red warning light was blinking in the corner of her monitor. Intrusion detected. External port 8080. Someone was hammering the firewall. It wasn't the government, their attacks were subtle. This was brute force. This was Damon. 10 miles away, in the back of a police transport van that had broken down on the side of the highway, Damon Sterling sat in the dark. The handcuffs were gone, removed by a corrupt guard who was currently outside smoking a cigarette, counting a stack of cash Damon had promised to wire from an offshore account. Damon held a burner phone in his bruised hands, his thumbs flying across the tiny screen. He wasn't trying to hack the main system. He knew Nia had locked that down. He was sending a signal to the Cayman server. He typed in a sequence of numbers the coordinates of the grave where Nia's mother was buried. It was a password she would never guess he used. "You think you won, Nia?" Damon muttered, his split lip stinging as he grinned. "You took my money, you took my reputation, but you forgot the narrative." He hit the execute button. The message sent. Protocol, scorched earth. Target, NIA-COREY. Execute. Back in the Onyx architecture tower, the red light on Nia's screen turned a terrifying shade of purple. A new window popped up. File upload in progress. Nia gasped. The Cayman server wasn't leaking Damon's dirt. It was uploading new files into the company database. She opened the packet sniffer to see what was coming in. Her eyes widened in horror. They were bank transfer records, dozens of them, all showing transfers of millions of dollars from Onyx Architecture accounts to known terrorist organizations in the Middle East and separatist groups in Eastern Europe. And every single transfer was digitally signed with her encryption key. "He's framing me," Nia whispered, her hands flying across the keyboard to sever the connection. "He's not trying to leak the truth. He's planting a lie." If those files finished uploading and embedded into the ledger, the FBI wouldn't just arrest her, they would bury her under the Patriot Act. She typed the kill command for the port. Access DENIED. The upload was bypassing the firewall using a legacy protocol Damon must have hard-coded into the hardware itself. "Maxwell," Nia screamed, hitting the intercom button. "Cut the hard line. Pull the fiber optic cables from the wall, now." "What?" Maxwell's voice crackled back, confused. "Nia, if we cut the hard line, the entire Sentinel system goes offline. The banks will crash, we'll be sued into oblivion. If we don't cut it in 30 seconds, I'm going to prison for treason," Nia yelled. "Do it!" She didn't wait for him. She grabbed a heavy metal paperweight from the desk, a trophy Damon had won for Innovator of the Year, and crawled under the desk. She found the main fiber optic junction box bolted to the floor. It was locked. She smashed the trophy against the lock. Once, twice, the metal groaned. On the screen, the upload bar hit 90%, 95%. She swung the trophy with a primal scream, shattering the plastic casing. She grabbed the bundle of glowing fiber optic cables with her bare hands and ripped them out. The office plunged into darkness. The hum of the servers died. The screen went black. The upload stopped at 99%. Nia sat there in the dark, breathing heavily, clutching the severed cables like a lifeline. The silence was absolute. She had just shut down the security grid for half the Western world. She had saved herself from the frame up, but she had just declared war on everyone who relied on her code. Her phone buzzed in the darkness. It wasn't Vance. It wasn't Maxwell. It was an unknown ID. She picked it up, her hand trembling. A distorted voice came through the speaker. "You are faster than I thought, wife," Damon's voice sneered through the static. "But you just turned off the lights for the whole country. The FBI isn't coming for me anymore. They're coming for the cyber terrorist who just crashed the economy. You wanted the company, you got it. Now let's see if you can survive it." The line went dead. Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder, coming closer to the tower. Nia stood up in the dark office, dropping the cables. She walked to the window and looked down. Below, the city streets were chaotic. Traffic lights had gone dark. The grid was down, and weaving through the stalled traffic were black SUVs with flashing red and blue lights, swarming toward the entrance of her building. She had stopped the upload, but she had triggered the trap. She was alone in the dark with the government at her door and a vengeful ex-husband pulling the strings from the shadows. Nia touched the cold glass of the window. "Okay, Damon," she whispered to the chaos below. "You want to play the villain? Then let me show you what a villain really looks like." She turned away from the window and headed not for the door, but for the private elevator that led to the roof. The architect wasn't going to wait to be arrested. She was going to disappear. The wind on the roof of the Sterling Tower was not just weather, it was a physical assault. 50 stories up, the Seattle storm raged with unchecked violence, whipping Nia's hair across her face and stinging her eyes with freezing rain. She stumbled onto the gravel surface of the rooftop, the heavy steel door slamming shut behind her with a force that vibrated through the soles of her shoes. Below her, the city was a grid of darkness, the blackout she had caused spreading like ink through water. The only illumination came from the chaotic swarm of red and blue emergency lights surrounding the base of the tower, a perimeter of law enforcement that was rapidly tightening its noose around the building. Nia rushed toward the helipad, her initial instinct screaming for the fastest way out, but she skidded to a halt before her foot touched the painted H through the driving rain. She saw the silhouette of a helicopter hovering just off the edge of the building, dark and unlit. It wasn't a news chopper. It was a tactical Black Hawk, its nose pointed directly at the roof, thermal cameras undoubtedly locking onto her heat signature. They were expecting her to fly. They were waiting for it. Nia backed away slowly, her mind racing through permutations and variables. The elevators were compromised. The stairwells were flooded with SWAT teams. The roof was covered by snipers. In a chess game, this was checkmate. But Nia wasn't playing chess, she was coding, and in code, there is always a workaround if you understand the architecture of the system. She turned her back on the helicopter and ran toward the maintenance shed on the north side of the roof, the side facing the blind alleyway. She didn't look for a door, she looked for the heavy, industrial mechanism of the window washing rig. It was docked there, a steel cradle suspended on a crane arm, locked in place for the night. It was slow, it was exposed, and in this wind it was a death trap. It was perfect. She reached the rig, her frozen fingers fumbling with the manual release lever. The metal was slick with rain and grease. She pulled with all her weight, gritting her teeth until the locking pin groaned in protest and gave way. The crane arms swung out over the abyss, swaying sickeningly in the gale. Nia climbed over the railing and dropped into the metal basket. It lurched violently, swinging out over the 50-story drop. She didn't look down. Looking down was irrelevant data. She focused on the control box. It was dead, no power, thanks to her cutting the hard line. She had to use the gravity brake. She gripped the manual descent handle, a rusted iron wheel, and turned it. The cable drum shrieked as friction fought gravity, and the basket jerked downward, dropping 10 feet in a heartbeat before catching. Nia gasped, gripping the railing, as the rig began a shuddering, terrifying descent into the dark chasm of the urban canyon. Inside the penthouse suite, the door to the executive office exploded inward, the frame splintering under the force of a battering ram. Director Vance walked in, stepping over the debris with practiced calm, his weapon drawn but lowered. Behind him, a team of tactical operators swept the room, their laser sights cutting through the gloom. The office was empty. The wind howled through the open window Nia had left ajar. Vance holstered his weapon and walked to the desk. He saw the shattered trophy, the floor panels ripped up, and the severed bundle of fiber optic cables glowing faintly like dying embers. He picked up the frayed end of a cable, inspecting the brutal manual severance. "She cut the hard line," Vance murmured, a grudging respect in his voice. She realized the upload was a frame-up and she nuked the connection. She chose chaos over capture. "Director," one of the agents shouted from the window, "thermal signature on the north face. Something is moving down the side of the building. It's the window washer rig. Vance walked to the window and looked down. He couldn't see the rig in the darkness and rain, but he knew she was there. "Smart," he said. "The rig doesn't show up on the elevator grid. By the time we get the windows open to intercept her, she'll be at street level." He tapped his earpiece. "All units, perimeter breach on the north alley. The target is descending externally. Do not engage with lethal force. I need her brain intact. Taser deployment only. Move." Nia was halfway down the building when the wind gusted, slamming the metal basket against the glass facade. The impact shattered a window on the 25th floor, showering her with shards of tempered glass. She shielded her face, feeling a sharp sting on her cheek, but she didn't stop turning the wheel. Her arms screamed with lactic acid, burning as if they were on fire. She was counting the floors. 20, 15, 10. She could see the ground now, a wet slab of concrete in the alleyway. But she also saw the flashlights. Beams of light were cutting into the alley from both ends. They were waiting for her to land. She couldn't take the rig all the way down. At the third floor, Nia locked the brake. The basket swung wildly. Below her, 3 uniformed officers were scanning the rig, weapons raised. "Come down," one of them shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Exit the basket with your hands up." Nia looked at the window next to her. It was dark, a storage room or a server closet. She grabbed the fire extinguisher she had found in the basket's emergency kit. She swung it with everything she had, smashing the heavy canister against the third-floor window. The glass webbed and collapsed. Nia didn't wait. She leaped from the swaying basket, diving through the broken window just as a taser probe sparked against the metal railing where her hand had been a second before. She hit the carpeted floor of the office, rolling to absorb the impact, glass crunching beneath her blazer. She was inside, but she wasn't safe. She was in the marketing department. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her ribs. She didn't head for the stairs, that's where they would be. She ran toward the mailroom. Every skyscraper had a mail chute system, archaic but functional, often leading directly to the loading dock dumpsters to bypass the lobby for heavy disposal. She found the chute, a narrow, polished metal slide meant for canvas bags. She didn't hesitate. She threw her purse in, climbed into the claustrophobic metal tube, and let go. She slid down 3 stories in total darkness, a terrifying, spiraling descent that ended abruptly when she shot out into a pile of shredded paper and cardboard in a rolling dumpster in the loading bay. The smell of wet paper and stale coffee filled her nose. She lay still, buried in the refuse, listening. Heavy boots were running on the concrete nearby. "Check the alley," a voice shouted. "The basket is empty," she jumped. Nia waited until the footsteps faded toward the street. Then she pushed the lid of the dumpster up an inch. The loading dock was empty, save for a delivery truck idling near the exit, its driver arguing with a security guard about the lockdown. Nia saw her chance. She crawled out of the dumpster, shedding the shredded paper from her clothes. She stayed low, moving in the shadow of the truck. As the driver climbed back into the cab, distracted by his frustration, Nia slipped underneath the chassis, pulling herself up onto the spare tire rack between the rear axles. It was a desperate, dangerous place to hide, smelling of diesel and road grime, but it was invisible. The truck lurched forward, the air brakes hissing a release. It rolled past the police barricade, the driver waving his manifest. The officer shone a flashlight into the cab, then waved him through. Nia held her breath as the truck accelerated, carrying her out of the cordon and into the anonymous, dark streets of Seattle. 2 miles away, in the neighborhood of Capitol Hill, the truck slowed for a red light at a dead intersection. Nia dropped from the undercarriage, hitting the wet asphalt and rolling toward the curb. She was bruised, bleeding, and soaked to the bone, but she was free. She pulled her hood up and merged into the crowd of confused pedestrians who were wandering the streets, their phones dead, looking for answers about the blackout. In the chaos, she was just another face. She walked for 20 minutes until she reached a nondescript brick building with a faded sign that read the Bit and Byte Internet Cafe. It was a relic from the early 2000s, a place that survived on cash and nostalgia. It was also the place where she and Damon had had their first date, back when they were both broke students. The windows were dark, the power out like the rest of the city. Nia didn't go to the front door. She went to the back, to a rusted keypad by the delivery entrance. She typed in a code, 112358, the Fibonacci sequence. It clicked and the door opened. Inside, the air was stale. She fumbled in the dark until she found the breaker box. She didn't flip the main switch that would alert the grid. She flipped a sub-breaker labeled generator. A low hum started in the basement, and a single row of computers in the back corner flickered to life, their fans whirring. This place had its own localized power, a backup she had installed herself as a favor to the owner years ago. Nia sat down at the terminal, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. She didn't log into the internet directly, that would be suicide. She routed her connection through 3 proxy servers in Estonia, Brazil, and Thailand. Then she accessed the public news feeds. Her face was everywhere. Cyber-terrorist attack in Seattle. Onyx CEO Nia Corey suspected of crashing Western grid, wanted for treason. The narrative Damon had planted was taking hold. They were painting her as a radical who destroyed the system because she couldn't control it. But Nia wasn't looking at the news. She was running a trace program. She needed to find Damon. He had called her from a burner phone, and burner phones were hard to track, but not impossible if you knew the caller's habits. Damon was a creature of comfort. Even on the run, he wouldn't be in a ditch. He would be somewhere with satellite access to monitor his upload. She scanned for encrypted satellite uplinks that had activated in the greater Seattle area within the last hour. There were 3. One at the FBI field office, one at the National Guard Armory, and one moving rapidly north on Interstate 5. "Got you," Nia whispered. She zoomed in on the moving signal. It wasn't a car. The velocity was too consistent, the altitude too stable. It was a low-flying aircraft, staying below the radar ceiling, a private seaplane. He was heading for the San Juan Islands to the archipelago near the Canadian border. Why there? There were no major servers there. Unless, Nia remembered something from the divorce discovery files. A property deed Damon had tried to hide. A vacation cabin on Orcas Island, but it wasn't a cabin. She pulled up the architectural blueprints she had archived. It had a reinforced basement, industrial cooling, and a dedicated fiber line running under the Puget Sound. It wasn't a house. It was the physical location of the backup server, the one Vance didn't know about, the one connected to the Cayman accounts. Damon was going there to finish what he started. He needed to physically bypass the lockout Nia had initiated. If he got to that server, he could manually inject the terrorism funding records into the blockchain, cementing her guilt forever. And once the data was hardened, not even the architect could erase it. Nia stood up, adrenaline sharpening her focus. She couldn't call the FBI, Vance would arrest her before she could explain. She couldn't drive there, the roads were gridlocked. She needed a boat, and she needed help. She pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive from her bra, the only piece of tech she had saved from the office. She plugged it in and opened a chat channel on the dark web, a channel that hadn't been used in 5 years. She typed a single handle, zero-sum. A moment later, a cursor blinked in response. "Zero-sum, I thought you were dead, or worse, corporate." Nia typed back, "I was sleeping, now I'm awake, I need a ride to Orcas Island, and I need a scrambler strong enough to blind a satellite." "Zero-sum, that's expensive, architect, what's the payment?" Nia didn't hesitate. "The backdoor key to the Pentagon. Vance has it, I can help you steal it back." There was a long pause. Then, meet me at Pier 54. Don't be late. The tide waits for no one. Nia yanked the drive, killed the power to the cafe, and ran back out into the rain. She had an ally, a target, and a timeline. Damon had a head start, but he was flying blind. He thought he was the only one playing the game. He didn't realize that when you challenge the architect, the building you're standing in is already a weapon. The chase wasn't over. It was just moving to the water. And in the dark, cold waters of the Puget Sound, silence was the deadliest weapon of all. Pier 54 was a ghost town of rotting wood and rusted iron, jutting out into the black churn of the Puget Sound like a broken finger pointing at the storm. The blackout had turned the waterfront into a void, stripping away the usual comfort of streetlights and neon signs. Nia stood in the shadow of a shipping container, shivering violently as the freezing rain soaked through her thin blazer. She checked her watch, though she couldn't see the face in the dark. It was a reflex born of anxiety. 10 minutes had passed since the rendezvous time. Every second she stood here was a second Damon was getting closer to cementing her destruction. She hugged herself, trying to retain body heat, her eyes scanning the water. The sound of the ocean slapping against the pilings was rhythmic and mocking, a constant reminder of the cold depth waiting below. Then, a shape detached itself from the darkness of the water. It wasn't a boat in the traditional sense. It looked more like a jagged shadow cutting through the waves. A low, throbbing vibration was the only announcement of its arrival, as a matte, black, rigid-hulled, inflatable vessel glided silently alongside the pier. The engine note was muffled, suppressed by military-grade baffling. A figure stood at the console, wrapped in a heavy waterproof poncho, face obscured by night vision goggles. Nia stepped out from the container, raising her hands slowly to show she wasn't armed. The figure killed the engine, drifting the last few feet on momentum, and tossed a heavy rope onto the wet wood near Nia's feet. "You look terrible, architect," a voice rasped from the boat. It was a woman's voice, rough with the friction of too many cigarettes and too much cynical laughter. Nia grabbed the rope and pulled the boat tight against the bumper tires. "Nice to see you too, Zero," Nia replied, jumping down into the hull. The boat rocked violently under her weight. The figure pulled off the goggles, revealing a sharp, angular face with a spiderweb tattoo climbing up her neck and piercing pale eyes that seemed to glow in the gloom. This was Zero-Sum, a legendary hacktivist whom the FBI had been chasing for a decade. She was also Nia's former roommate at MIT, before Zero dropped out to wage a digital war against corporate overreach. "Put this on," Zero said, kicking a dry survival suit toward Nia. "The water is 40 degrees. If we flip, you'll be dead in 3 minutes without it." Nia pulled the heavy, rubberized suit over her soaked clothes, the warmth instantaneous and welcome. "Did you bring the scrambler?" Nia asked, zipping the suit up to her chin. Zero pointed to a silver briefcase bolted to the deck next to the throttle. "Military grade. It emits a frequency that makes us look like a patch of drifting kelp to radar, but it won't hide us from eyes. The Coast Guard is swarming the sound because of the blackout. If they see a wake, they'll shoot." Zero gunned the engine, and the boat surged forward, the bow lifting as it carved a path into the storm. The journey north was a brutal endurance test. Zero drove with no lights, navigating solely by the green glow of her instrument panel and an intuition honed by years of smuggling data drives across borders. The rain felt like gravel hitting Nia's face. To their left, the dark mass of the Olympic Peninsula loomed. To their right, the faint, powerless skyline of Seattle faded into the mist. They were ghosts moving through a dead world. Nia gripped the grab rail, her knuckles white. "He's on Orcas Island," Nia yelled over the wind. "The north side, a private compound." "I know the place," Zero yelled back, banking the boat hard to avoid a floating log. "I scanned the blueprints while you were climbing out of the dumpster. It's not a cabin, Nia, it's a fortress. Reinforced concrete, independent power grid motion sensors every 10 feet. And worse, he has automated sentry drones. Nia's stomach dropped. Drones. Damon had always been obsessed with automation. Can we hack them? Nia asked. Not from here, Zero said. They're air-gapped, not connected to the internet. We have to be within 50 feet to inject a signal. That means we have to beach the boat and walk right up to the front door. A beam of light swept across the water half a mile ahead, a Coast Guard cutter scanning for smugglers or terrorists. Zero killed the throttle immediately, letting the boat settle into the trough of a large wave. The light swept over them, illuminating the whitecaps just yards away, but missing their low profile. They held their breath as the cutter churned past, its heavy diesel engines vibrating in their chests. Once it was gone, Zero engaged the throttle again. "We're close," she said. "Get ready." Orca's island emerged from the darkness like the back of a sleeping leviathan. It was rugged and tree-covered, usually a haven for wealthy tech billionaires seeking solitude. Tonight, it was a battleground. Zero steered the boat into a small, rocky cove on the northern tip, far away from the main harbor. They ran the boat aground on the slick stones, the hull grinding with a teeth-setting screech. Zero killed the engine and grabbed a backpack filled with gear. "We're on foot from here," she whispered. 2 miles through the woods, keep your head down. The forest was dense and smelled of pine needles and wet earth. They moved in silence, Zero leading the way with a handheld thermal scanner. Nia followed, her mind racing. She wasn't a soldier, she was a coder. Her weapons were logic and syntax, not stealth and stamina. But anger was a powerful fuel. Every step she took was a step toward the man who had stolen her life. After an hour of trekking through the underbrush, they reached the ridge overlooking Damon's property. It was a monstrosity of modern architecture, a brutalist slab of gray concrete and glass perched on the edge of a cliff dropping straight into the ocean. But unlike the rest of the blackout-stricken region, this house was alive. Floodlights bathed the perimeter in blinding white light. The hum of a massive industrial generator throbbed in the air. And patrolling the sky above the roof were 3 quadcopter drones, moving in a synchronized figure-8 pattern. "He's definitely home," Zero muttered, crouching behind a fallen log. "And he's paranoid. Look at the windows. Steel shutters are down. He's in bunker mode." "He's in the basement," Nia said, pointing to a ventilation stack rising from the ground near the garage. "That's the heat exhaust for the server cooling system. He's down there manually uploading the files." Nia pulled out a tablet Zero had given her. "I need to get close to that vent. If I can splice into the sensor cable for the cooling unit, I can trick the system into thinking the server is overheating. The emergency protocol will shut it down to prevent fire. And force Damon to open the door," Zero finished. "Smart, but to get to that vent, you have to cross 50 yards of open lawn covered by those drones." "I can distract them," Zero said, pulling a flare gun from her pack. "I'll head to the east perimeter and fire a flare into the woods. The drones are programmed to investigate heat signatures. When they swarm the flare, you run." It was a dangerous plan. If the drones had thermal cameras, they would see Nia the moment she left the tree line, but they had no other choice. "Go," Nia said. "Give me the signal." Zero vanished into the darkness. Nia waited, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She watched the drones buzzing lazily over the wet grass. They looked like giant insects, their red indicator lights blinking in the rain. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then a bright hiss tore through the night air to her right. A magnesium flare erupted in the tree canopy, bathing the forest in harsh red light. The drones reacted instantly. They broke formation, banking sharply toward the heat source with a menacing whine of electric motors. Nia sprinted. She burst from the tree line, her boots slipping on the wet grass. She ran low, keeping her body compact. The distance seemed to stretch impossibly long. The generator hum grew louder, masking the sound of her footsteps. She reached the concrete wall of the garage and threw herself flat against it, gasping for air. She looked up. The drones were hovering over the burning flare, scanning the trees. She was clear. She crawled toward the ventilation stack. It was a metal box protruding from the ground, vibrating with the force of the fans below. She pulled a multi-tool from her pocket and unscrewed the access panel. Inside was a bundle of wires. She recognized the color coding. Damon had used the same standard she had established at the company. Yellow for data, red for power, blue for sensors. She isolated the blue wire. She didn't cut it. Cutting it would trigger an alarm. Instead, she stripped a small section of the insulation and twisted a copper bypass loop onto it, effectively short-circuiting the temperature reading. She pulled out a 9-volt battery from her pocket and touched it to the loop, sending a spike of voltage down the line. The effect was immediate. The hum of the fans pitched up into a scream as they tried to compensate for a phantom heat spike. Inside the house, alarms would be blaring. Temperature critical, the system would be screaming. Thermal shutdown imminent. Nia held the battery in place, praying the fail-safe worked. Suddenly, the massive cooling fans ground to a halt. The generator sputtered and throttled down. The floodlights around the house flickered and died, plunging the lawn into darkness. The server had executed a hard crash to save itself. Nia dropped the battery and ran toward the side door of the garage. The electronic lock was dead without power. She tried the handle. Locked, of course. But the mechanical integrity of the door depended on the magnetic seal, which was now inactive. She braced her foot against the frame and pulled with all her strength. The door popped open with a groan of weather stripping. She slipped inside. She was in. The garage smelled of gasoline and ozone. A sleek sports car sat covered in a tarp. Nia ignored it and moved toward the interior door leading to the house. She opened it slowly, stepping into a hallway that led to the kitchen. It was pitch black inside, the only light coming from the faint gray of the storm outside the windows. She moved silently, her hand trailing along the wall for guidance. She knew the layout from the blueprints. The entrance to the basement server room was behind a false bookcase in the study. She reached the study. The door was ajar. A beam of flashlight cut through the darkness from the room ahead. Nia froze. "Damn it!" Damon's voice echoed from the stairwell hidden behind the bookcase. "The cooling system is fried. I need a flashlight. I have to reboot manually." He was coming up the stairs. Nia looked around frantically for a weapon. There was nothing but heavy books and decorative statues. She grabbed a bronze bust of a Greek philosopher from the desk. It weighed 5 pounds, heavy enough to do damage. She pressed herself against the wall next to the hidden door. The beam of the flashlight swept across the room, missing her by inches. Heavy footsteps stomped up the wooden stairs. Damon emerged from the darkness, a high-powered flashlight in one hand and a tablet in the other. He looked deranged, his nose bandaged and swollen, his eyes wild, his expensive suit ruined by sweat and grime. He was muttering to himself, tapping furiously on the tablet. "Just 2 more files, just 2 more." He stepped into the study. Nia didn't hesitate. She swung the bronze bust. But she was tired, and he was fueled by adrenaline. He sensed the movement at the last second and ducked. The statue grazed his shoulder, causing him to stumble and drop the flashlight. It clattered across the floor, spinning and casting dizzying shadows on the walls. Damon roared in pain and spun around. In the strobing light, he saw her. "Nia," he breathed, disbelief warring with rage on his face. You're here, how?" He lunged at her. Nia sidestepped, but he was fast. He grabbed her arm, his grip crushing. "You ruined everything," he screamed, spitting saliva in her face. "You think you can stop me? I own the truth. I write the history." He threw her backward. Nia crashed into the bookshelf, books raining down on her. Pain exploded in her back, but she scrambled to her feet. Damon pulled a gun from his waistband, a small black pistol. He leveled it at her chest. His hand was shaking. "No more code," Damon whispered, his eyes wide and glassy. "No more glitches, just a simple deletion." He cocked the hammer. The click sounded like a thunderclap in the small room. Nia stared down the barrel. She calculated the distance. 6 feet, too far to rush him. Too close to miss. She was trapped. But then a new sound filled the room. A low, electronic chirp from the tablet Damon was still holding in his other hand. He glanced down instinctively. The screen, which had been displaying the upload status, suddenly turned bright red. A skull and crossbones icon appeared, Zero's calling card. The text on the screen read, "Drone control override, target acquired." Outside the window, a high-pitched whine grew deafeningly loud. Damon looked up just as the glass of the study window shattered inward. One of his own security drones, its navigation lights blinking angrily, smashed through the shutter and hovered in the center of the room. It wasn't attacking, it was projecting. A laser grid scanned the room, locking onto the gun in Damon's hand. The automated voice of the security system, hacked by Zero from the perimeter, announced, "Weapon detected. Unauthorized personnel. Engaging countermeasures." Damon screamed as the drone fired a taser barb directly into his chest. The voltage seized his muscles, locking his body in a rigid spasm. He fired the gun reflexively, the bullet going wide and burying itself in the ceiling. He collapsed to the floor, convulsing, the gun skittering away. Nia kicked the weapon under the desk and grabbed the tablet he had dropped. The upload bar was at 98%. She hit cancel. The bar stopped. She hit delete all. "Are you sure?" the prompt asked. Nia pressed yes with a thumb that didn't shake. The screen cleared. Database purged. Nia slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. The drone hovered protectively over her, its camera lens fixed on Damon's twitching form. The front door of the house burst open, and Zero sprinted in, wet and breathless, holding a flare gun. She looked at Damon, then at Nia. "Did I miss the party?" Zero asked, panting. Nia held up the tablet, a tired smile finally breaking through her exhaustion. "We cleaned the house," Nia said. "Now let's call the FBI. I think they'll want to see what was really on the server." 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in Seattle did not smell of stale coffee and desperation like the Courtroom had. It smelled of aged champagne, fresh orchids, and the intoxicating aroma of absolute triumph. The chandeliers overhead didn't just glow. They seemed to hum with the collective energy of the city's elite, casting a golden light over a sea of black ties and designer gowns. This was the inaugural gala for the Corey Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to funding digital literacy for women in underrepresented communities. But everyone in the room knew the real reason they were there. They were there to catch a glimpse of the woman who had single-handedly rewritten the rules of corporate warfare. They were there for Nia Corey. Nia stood near the velvet-draped entrance, smoothing the fabric of her dress. It was a bold choice, a vibrant, deep emerald green that stood out against the safe sea of black tuxedos. She wasn't hiding in gray wool anymore. Her hair was worn loose, framing a face that had lost the gaunt look of exhaustion and gained a new, serene strength. Beside her stood Zero, looking uncomfortably stiff in a tailored suit, though the spiderweb tattoo on her neck was still proudly visible above the collar. "You nervous?" Zero asked, scanning the crowd with the paranoid vigilance of a hacker who expected a trap. "They're just people, Zero," Nia replied calmly. "They can't hurt us, we own their data." Zero cracked a rare smile. "Fair point, but I still scan the guest list. Director Vance is here, table 4. The lights dimmed and the murmur of conversation died down instantly. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the podium on the stage. Nia walked up the stairs, the silence of the room markedly different from the silence of the trial. That silence had been judgmental, heavy with pity. This silence was reverent. It was the silence of anticipation. Nia gripped the sides of the podium, taking a moment to look out at the hundreds of faces. She saw Maxwell Carter, her CFO, who had helped rebuild the company from the ashes of Damon's scandal. She saw Sarah, her former public defender turned general counsel, wiping a tear from her eye. And in the back, shadowed but present, she saw Director Vance, raising a glass of water in a silent toast. "Thank you all for coming," Nia began, her voice amplified and steady, filling the cavernous room without a tremor. "A year ago, I sat in a chair, not unlike the ones you are sitting in now, though far less comfortable. I sat there for 72 hours and listened to a man tell the world that I was weak. He told the jury and the press that my silence was an admission of guilt. He said I was broken." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "We live in a world that rewards volume. We are taught that the person shouting the loudest is the one in charge. The bullies, the braggarts, the ones who interrupt. We are taught to fear their noise." She leaned in closer to the microphone. "But I learned something in that courtroom and in the dark waters of the Puget Sound. I learned that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes silence is the sound of a weapon being loaded. Sometimes silence is the architecture of a trap. I stayed quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was waiting. I was listening. I was gathering the truth while he was busy shouting lies." A ripple of applause started in the front row and spread backward, but Nia raised a hand. "Tonight isn't about revenge. Revenge is messy and inefficient. Tonight is about construction. We renamed the company Onyx Architecture not just because it sounds strong, but because that is what we do. We build systems that protect the truth. And we ensure that no one, no CEO, no government agency, no partner, can ever delete the contributions of the quiet ones again." The applause that followed didn't just fill the room, it shook the floorboards. It was a thunderous standing ovation that went on for minutes. Nia stood there, bathing in it, accepting it not for herself, but for the woman she had been, the invisible coder in the basement, the medicated wife, the ghost. She had buried that woman so this one could rise. As the applause faded and the gala transitioned into soft jazz and mingling, Nia stepped off the stage and walked directly to table 4. Director Vance didn't stand up, but he shifted in his seat, a sign of respect from a man who toppled governments for a living. "Quite a speech, architect," Vance said, his voice dry. "The Pentagon is very happy with the new encryption protocols you installed, although my analysts are still trying to find the back door." "They won't find it, Vance," Nia said pleasantly, picking up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Because there isn't one. If you want access to the data, you get a warrant." Just like everyone else, that was the deal. Vance chuckled, a low, rasping sound. "You play a hard game, Nia, but you keep the lights on. That's all we care about. Just keep an eye on your firewall. Your husband might be gone, but the world is full of Damons." "Speaking of," Nia asked, her voice cooling. "How is he?" Vance took a sip of his water. "Adjusting poorly. ADX Florence is a supermax facility. He's in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day due to the flight risk established by his little stunt on Orcas Island. No computers, no internet, no audience. He works in the laundry unit folding sheets. I'm told he spends his free hours shouting at the walls, telling them he's a genius, but the walls, well, they stay silent." Nia nodded. It was a fitting end. For a man who needed constant validation, silence was a fate worse than death. She turned to leave but stopped. "Ance," she said, "make sure he gets a copy of Forbes next month." Vance raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I'm on the cover," Nia said, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. "And I want him to see who bought the frame." She walked away, moving through the crowd toward the balcony. The rain had stopped, leaving the Seattle skyline scrubbed clean and glittering against the dark expanse of the night. The air was cold, crisp, and biting, a stark difference from the suffocating, recycled air of her old life. She walked to the railing, gripping the cold metal, feeling the wind whip through her hair. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a builder. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. She pulled it out. It was a notification from the smart home system she had coded for her new house. Alert, daughter is sleeping, heartbeat steady. Nia stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in her eyes. Tears pricked at the corners, hot and fast. This was the only validation she needed. Damon had used the company as a piggy bank and a weapon. She had turned it back into a shield. Her double doctorate, her mother's patience, her years of silence, it had all led to this. She looked down at the city streets below, tiny cars moving like blood through a vein. She thought about the millions of women out there who were currently being told they were crazy or stupid or invisible. She turned back toward the warmth of the ballroom. Through the glass, she saw Zero laughing with Maxwell Carter, explaining something with wild hand gestures. She saw her future, unwritten and wide open. The silence was over. It was time to make some noise. Nia Corey proved that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting threats. It's the one quietly taking notes. She turned her pain into power and her silence into a strategy that took down a corrupt empire. Her story is a reminder that no matter how trapped you feel, the truth is a weapon that no amount of money can silence forever. What did you think of Nia's master plan? Would you have been able to stay that quiet for that long, or would you have cracked under the pressure? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the quiet ones.